So before we go too much further, some of you might remember a video of my green bottle blue tarantulas breeding, and that got some interesting comments. Those poor babies. So if you didn't watch it, basically I've got no interest in breeding them for sale. Plenty of people do that. They're around, they're easy to get. I've never bred tarantulas, and I wanted to see what went on naturally. So I didn't take the egg sac away. Everyone said, oh, she'll eat the eggs, they're known for it. I just want to see the process of tarantulas reproducing. Fascinating stuff. She didn't eat her eggs, and I left them longer and longer. I thought, now, do you know what? Nothing's visible. In the end, way after time, I cut the egg sac open. Loads and loads, nearly, I don't know, probably was about 100 babies, spiderlings, and they'd all desiccated and died. They hadn't broke free, apart from 4. And out of the 4, 3 of them are absolutely thriving. Look at that little beauty. So a species that's known for being kept incredibly dry. You can see it's eating well. We've cracked the lid off. We're going to take those boluses out, those dead husks. I'm not going to feed it today because look how well it's been eating. So every week they're fed a cricket or a cockroach, either pre-killed or chopped in half, bless them. And they're thriving, and they're getting, every 5 days, a little tiny mist of water on their webbing. A lot of people have said, oh, you know, they'll be too wet. They're in these waxworm tubs that have holes in the top and the bottom. So it doesn't stay wet. It means the spider can hydrate. And it's on a clear husk substrate. Someone else commented, Dave, stick to snakes. You don't know what you're doing with tarantulas. Well, and he said they don't live on that stuff in the wild, this species. Of course they don't. Nor do my snakes. I wanted an airy, lightweight, dry substrate. Not a sand soil mix or a sand coir mix or anything like that. For these little slings, I wanted something that would dry out quick and be lightweight, that they could push around in. They've all webbed up on top of it. It's working, an absolute treat. I'm well into my 50s, and I've been keeping tarantulas since I was about 15 or 16. First time I've ever tried to breed them. Successful first time. So that was fascinating stuff. But look at that, absolutely gorgeous. So these are thriving despite everything. What you're going to see in this video is you don't need to be a sheeple, but you do. And there's nothing wrong with thinking up something with your animals yourself, trying things. Many things have been tried before, however. But for sure, if you're watching these videos, either you know far more than me, you don't need to do what I do. Equally, if you're trying to keep tarantulas for the first time on new species, this isn't a how-to, this is just what I've been up to lately. I handle my tarantulas for schools sometimes. I also will free handle them sometimes when we're moving things around. I know my spiders, I know the ones I have, I know exactly how they're going to react. But to learn about rehousing, handling in a default safe method, really, I'm probably one of the best people on YouTube. It's probably Tom's Big Spiders. He treats everything as you should probably. What if? What if? And when you're keeping animals, unless you know your animals very well, what if is the best way to keep them? What if it falls off your hand? What if it drops off the cork bark? What if it does suddenly bite? Certainly, Tom's Big Spiders, I think, for a really good way of how to keep tarantulas, very hard to beat. There's nothing about that guy that's about showing off, clickbait, getting views. It really is. This is how I keep them, and this is how I recommend you keep them. And I certainly think he's a good resource for anyone in the world of tarantula keeping, especially if you're relatively new. He will show you the right way of doing things and the safest way for those animals. Let's move on. So I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm in a shop that sells boxes, I kind of end up drifting over and thinking, what could that one be used for? And this one. So when I was in Costco and I saw these stackable acrylic shoe boxes with 2 different doors. We've got a larger door on one side and a smaller door on the other. Reasonably good magnets. They're certainly quite sturdily held together when they close. Nice clear acrylic. I did kind of think I might get a box full of those, pop them together and see what they'd look like for tarantula housing, because they suit arboreal species due to the way the doors are. You can have them upright. Obviously not just tarantulas, they'd be handy for all kinds of things. And they also sit terrestrially or semi-terrestrial, whether they're on their base, their side, or arboreal for the end. So here's what they are. Incredibly sturdily made framework for these things. So they stack, even if relatively heavy with substrate. The side acrylic is relatively thin, but the structure around the edges and how they go together makes them very strong. But of course you're going to need to cover up the holes where the door handles are. They actually have a hole in, and you're going to need a substrate dam or two cut to measure whichever configuration you're going to put them in. This is just cheaply, with second-hand perspex I've got acrylic lying around. Holes, by the way, soldering iron, put them how you like, ventilation how you see fit. And I've just used silica. I use an angle grinder, believe it or not, with a thin blade to cut the acrylic. That's all I had handy. Second-hand acrylic, a little bit rough. Manufacturing there by me. And that's held in place with some aquarium-safe silicone. Is aquarium-safe silicone different from the stuff with fungicide in for your bathroom? Absolutely, definitely. So you can see what I've done. I've used a little bit of perspex or acrylic to block off the holes. And I've used a cut to size. I've got a 4-inch 100mm dam there to hold back any substrate for when you open the door. It's quite close against the door, so other than a small spider, nothing's going to sort of go down that gap. So reasonably good looking enclosures, and you can see what I mean if you just now swap that substrate dam down, cut it to fit what now is the lower face of the door. Yeah, you've got a pretty good arboreal. Put those air holes in, that ventilation to suit that configuration of how you use it. So due to their shape, you really have got 3 different styles of enclosure. You can have low and wide base. You can have kind of semi-arboreal with a slightly narrower base, or full-on tall enclosure. It locks together, and I'll show you that in a second. So have a look. If you want to, it locks together well, quite well sealed, but run a bead of silicone around after you've locked it together to make it totally watertight. It's pretty good as it is, quite tight tolerances. Don't silicone it first. I found out you can't lock it together. Okay, so the first one done. Time to see how many Socotra Island blues I still have in their current enclosure and move those guys over here. Okay, so this is where they've been for a while now. It's almost a waste of space. There's not that many in there. We need to see if they're all there still. A couple of the older males have perished. They just hang out here, so it's kind of wasting that enclosure. They just don't come out day or night, just the odd one now and again. So I think we're going to move them into one of these new acrylic enclosures, a little bit smaller, and see where they go from here. So we just need to find out who's where, what's going on. They've been undisturbed now for quite some time in here, and they've just webbed up heavily behind things, but they haven't filled the enclosure with webbing, basically because it's probably huge for the handful that of Balfouri that are in here. So there is one in there. We'll put her to one side for a second or two and just see anything's in here. Balfouri's are incredibly steady. People say about New World and Old World. I think, and I don't know, and you know, a lot of people spout things parrot fashion. It's believed and probably very factual in some cases that generally the Old World stuff has a more potent venom than a lot of the New World stuff. However, to say that Old World tarantulas are all psychotic, bitey things, and New World tarantulas are all chilled out, is honestly, it couldn't be any further from the truth. It's individual species and individual animals. And Balfouri, all the ones I've kept, have been brilliant. They don't jump off on things. They absolutely, I've never had any sign of any ill temper, no matter how much I've disturbed them, even like this. So nearly all of them are communally living behind that bit of corkbark, pressed against the glass of the enclosure with a black screen on the outside. So a nice dark, tight little den. And they're all in there except the bigger female. So out they come. Now I know what you're going to say. Oh, I know what you're thinking. And the answer is no, they absolutely won't. They might do laps round and round this. These ones, my ones, they're not going to jump off. In fact, getting them off of anything is hard because they are so resistant to jumping or falling. But don't do it like this. I'm showing you what I've been up to. So they're in there, all but one. Oddly, I wanted to see what was in there before I put anything in there for them to make a home of, see how many I'd got left. And we're just a couple down, which is great because I know a couple of the older males did perish. It was a mix of two colonies, a younger and an older one. Now then, false widows get everywhere in my exotic room and they breed like crazy. And there's one in there with loads of egg sacs. Look at that. Great little spiders. She's making a run for it. We don't really want her to get squashed, so we need to sort of put her to one side in a second. There she is. Look at that. Beautiful things. Have a habit of looking a bit like an over-enlarged tick, which kind of takes away some of their beauty, and their patterns vary, but I like them, so we'll let her go. Whee! Now then, back to the girl that we left on the side in her corkbark tube. No, I know what you're thinking. She was not ever going to run out and run away out of her little home there. So just move these out of the way because they're all going to come scurrying back out. We've put some bark in there now, and we're going to put a bit more on later in the video. So lots of tight places for them to get behind. Not rocks, because we're stacking the enclosures. The substrate is quite heavy. We don't want the weight. So we've got her out of a tube with the use of a fat cable tie and a gentle prod. There she goes, off into a new home. So there they are. Poor things, they really are homeless, and it will take them some time now to establish new webs, new homes, and sort of settle back in, bless them. But Balfouri, Socotra Island Blues, oh wow. I really say if you've got more than a few tarantulas, these should be in your collection. A great old world species that look unlike anything else really. And of course, really the only true communal tarantula that we can keep almost incident free, almost, with Balfouri. Really interesting that we can have a setup with multiple spiders in. Gorgeous. Okay, now we've had a bit of interest, let's just look at the boring bit, I guess. Just look at how these go together. So they are clear, they come with little stickers on with coloured arrows, so laying them out on a table, you can see exactly where each panel goes in relation. And they have a tight, take a bit of pushing and they click into place each side, build it up, pretty simple, but the arrows help. The corner pieces are not butted up, they have got an angle, they fit in a groove, so it makes the whole structure really solid once it's assembled, despite the relatively thin acrylic sheet of the panels, as I've already mentioned. The actual structure of the corners is really, really rigid. The doors are great. Magnets seem pretty solid to me, they seem okay. Not entirely sure, a real full-grown, humongous bird eater. Could it push out? I guess I'll tell you guys in the future. We'll do a review. Probably need to do a re-review on the Spider Shop acrylic put together sort of flat packed enclosures as well at some point. Here's a problem. Obviously, if your spider can't get out that gap, half of its lunch probably will. So you do need to blank off those two gaps. Other than that, pretty solid. So Soldering iron's great. If not, and you've got a hob, just put a fork over it and use a fork to melt holes. But soldering iron's probably the easiest way to go. They're only a couple of quid now on Amazon or wherever. I've done different configurations of ventilation holes. And then, of course, you have to put in some kind of substrate dam. Aquarium safe silicone, as already mentioned. Cut that to the height of the substrate you're going to use. And again, silicone there. And as already mentioned, quite a rough job. Not took a lot of time on it. And use scrap acrylic I'd got lying around. But of course, those scratches and things, once the substrate's there, you're not going to see it. So that's the ventilation we've gone for. Use what you like. The substrate's quite heavy. I've used a sand coir mix, about 30% play pit or clean fine sand, because it holds a burrow well once damp. Much better than just a coir fibre on its own. And we're going to add other stuff in there, some isopods, some leaf litter, and so on and so forth. But for now, a substrate's okay. A complete dirt mix, just soil or sand, is going to be too heavy on those stackable things. So there we are. She's in there exploring. And at night time, they're all out. Okay, now time to rehouse the mama, the female green bottle blue that produced those babies. So again, big adult. She's pretty sedate. Some of the ones I've had, they'll really kick hairs, and certainly the male, sometimes they'll run around like idiots around their enclosure. But her, she's pretty chilled out. Beautiful creatures. A really recommended species. They're just absolutely gorgeous, and so easy to keep as long as you meet their sort of simple requirements. And one of those is not wet. But look at that. So not really in shot. Didn't have the tripod lined up very well, but off she goes. So let's just have a look at them. We've got 2 out of the 4. They come in a pack of 4, which is pretty good. Really, really inexpensive. 2 out of the 4 are pretty much done. They stack. I'll put a lot of weight on these physically, and they stack well. There's no bowing or buckling. So there's 2 left to go. But I've just swapped this top one around so you can see what I mean. You can get the arboreal look, or you can have a semi-arboreal and still have quite a wide enclosure. Well, I hope I don't regret this. The tiny little grown-on spiderling of the Goliath is chunky, feeding well. So I'm going to take that risk and move him over into one of these enclosures. Hope I don't regret it, but we'll see. I think he'll feed. I think I can keep it moist enough, and I think I can get the food to him enough, but we'll see. What a darling. A tiny thing that hopefully is going to grow into a very big thing. So you noticed a dead one on the top there, and it is dead, I'm 100% sure, but you never know. 99.9 no, it's dead. Right at the top, it crawled up to the top of the packaging, and I think the heat pack had cooked it. It just got past all the packaging inside the tub still, but I think possibly overheated, because I know Raymond certainly wouldn't have sent anything iffy out, and all the others are very, very healthy and happy indeed. So they do like a deep substrate, certainly as they grow. They will burrow down. Now, when they do shed, they'll be under there in a relatively moist environment. So moist at the bottom, wet layer at the bottom, drying as it goes up. Good ventilation, but also regular spraying. Not so it gets wet down there, so it's always slightly moist. If you've ever found these in places like Thailand, these forest scorpions, it does get dry sometimes, but they're usually in the pretty damp, rotten logs. If nothing else, well, if they're not in the tourist markets, of course, being eaten, which is a sad state of affairs. Minuscule little things. How kind to be sent some of Raymond's offsprings, captive bred little forest scorpions. They'll grow well in there. They'll need plenty of small food items in there, because obviously it's a rather large enclosure for a handful of baby scorplings. That's a play on words, isn't it? They're either babies or they're not. A handful of scorplings to find the food, but we'll make that quite bioactive. There'll be all kinds of things in there, as well as what they get fed. So we're going to put a few of these in with the baby scorpions to breed. They've got a little bit of food, they'll be fed, sort of slightly bioactive, but actually to produce teeny tiny offspring, we're going to put a tiny white species of woodlouse in as well, and some springtails, and that'll give those guys something to be going on with, sort of some natural food there, because these things are highly reproductive, and they come in all sizes. Look at that. So this is a species, quite famous because it's a species of scorpion found in the UK in a certain dockland area or two. Scorpions found in the UK, even in our winters, but of course a south coast dockland, nice and warm compared to a frosty, snowy, icy part of England. Look at that. So beautiful little species, captive bred youngster. See how it goes. Okay, this should mean that we've got a spiderling blondie and a spiderling stirmi. Let's see. By the way, this one is from the spider shop, and it is a bit of a gimpy one. It's the last one they had, and it's shed out with, or molted out with 7 out of its 8 legs intact. They said it will come at a reduced price, and I guess it's in there, squished up. Let's have a little look. Plenty of packaging, heat pack, still warm. Got the shock-proof packaging, which is great if you're gonna be shoving things in. By the way, if you lick the end of these and stick them on your nose, you look like a unicorn. Hold on, let's get that package open. Hold on. Yeah, it is. Scrawny little fellow. I'll give him a try. Basically, it looks like a very, very expensive house spider. Probably moves just as quick, knowing these guys. Theraphosa or Tegenaria. Let him settle in. Get some food in there. And see if he grows. Doesn't look too bad for a 7-legged critter. Okay, so the curly hair is pretty good size adult and just molted out 2 days ago, maybe 3. Probably going to be a little bit worried because he's probably not hard enough fully. But I'm going to move this guy purely because one of those new acrylic enclosures is actually earmarked for one of the Theraphosa to grow up in, but it's going to be a while before that tiny spiderling approaches anything like that enclosure wise. Seems silly to have it empty. This guy's getting bigger, and why not have someone that's always out, a great species that's always out, may as well be on better display than where it is now. Been in here now for quite some time. I think we'll move it over, and when the time comes we'll rehouse him in an even bigger enclosure, generically him. Anyway, curly hairs in the UK, financial value for a spiderling is 0. People will give you them. They're probably going to cost you £5 in a shop or something. They really are a good starter species. And now, when I started back in the 80s, a starter species was one that was friendly and easy to handle. Nowadays, it means a hardy, tough, easy to keep, and low aggressive. They're not aggressive, a low defensive spider. Flick hairs when they're young, pretty easy going once they're bigger. But nowadays, of course, free handling is quite frowned on within the social media world. You decide, it's your animal. Free handling for exciting clickbait and views, I think, is a little bit sad. You know, sort of, they tend to be the videos where you think, cool, that thing's at a bit of risk of falling or biting, or sensationalizing it. But for sure, this guy comes out at schools, gets free handled, not by anyone but me, but just to give off that fact that they're not the fearsome, terrifying creatures made out to be. And I've got to say, things like my Socotra islands, absolutely the most docile things in the world. Those things just want to get back where they came from. They really are an easygoing animal. They're just quick to try and get away. Of course, these new world species, often slower, easier going, not so freaky when they move, and it doesn't make people jump or actually get scared of even opening their enclosures. Probably quite worried now. Not too bad, but when you're a big old tarantula and you've just shed your exoskeleton, just molted out, just take a little while before everything, including your fangs, hardens off again. So you are certainly a very defensive time in your life where you certainly really can't do a lot to defend yourself, and you are relying on those urticating hairs. Anyway, let's pop the whole thing into its new home and let it settle in. Go on then. Not a moisture dependent species, it's not wet in here, but it is a little bit damper than is ideal, especially when it's just molted, but it's okay. Remember, it wasn't set up for this animal. Normally with this animal, fill the water bowl. Well, where's the water bowl? There it is. And let it overflow into the corner, and I leave the rest perfectly dry. But going hard enough, old thing. You can really see where they get that curly hair name. Certainly one big, hairy, lovely spider. So on the whole, quite happy. Like I say, I've took no time at all. You can do these things way nicer. This is old acrylic, pre-scratched, cut with an angle grinder because it was quicker. You could make it an awful lot an awful lot better job than I've done. And just to recap, if you silicone the joints as you assemble the enclosure, it won't click into place without a hell of a fight. So the best way is, if you really want to make sure they're leak proof, by the way, quite watertight actually from the off, but silicone up around the edges and the sides on the lower third if you're going to have a wetter substrate after you have assembled it and it's locked into place, because at the end of the day, even if you make a mess and you put thick silicone, apart from here at the front, the rest is under substrate. It doesn't matter what it looks like. So they're all settled in, or settling in. Green bowl blue, one of the best tarantulas you can have in your collection. Absolute stunners, most often out once adult, and often do a lot of webbing when they're settled in, so they look great. The whole setup, easy to keep as long as you don't wet them down. So that goes in there. All the little wee things in there. Let that guy, I think, shed and molt out. We'll see, but it certainly doesn't need feeding at the moment. And then nothing in here on show now, but at night these guys, the Socotra Islands, are still crawling around everywhere, trying to make up their mind where the heck they're going to live and make their web. But realistically, for a very limited amount of extra work, I'm quite pleased with the size of these enclosures and how well they look. Let's see how time goes with the relatively thin sides, rather faces. The actual edges, there's a lot of weight there relatively. They are rock solid and really sturdy and well designed. But of course, not the thickest skins on them, so we'll have to see. Catch you guys later on.